Silver Currents. Chapter 1. The Hotel at Dusk. The room smelled of salt and old linen. Outside, the sun went down over Key West, the kind of gold that makes you forgive things you shouldn't. He poured her a drink without asking. She didn't thank him. They both knew what the silence meant. The fan turned lazily above them, moving the air but not the heat. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching the slow roll of her cigarette smoke near the open window. The light cut across her shoulder, made her skin look like sand after rain. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm tired," she answered. "Of me?" She smiled, faintly. "Of everything that needs explaining." He looked down at the drink in his hand, the thin amber swirl of it catching the last light. "We could start again. We've started again too many times." The fan groaned. Outside, a car passed, slow, with the radio playing something Spanish. It faded into the distance like a voice turning away. He wanted to touch her then, just her hand, or maybe the soft skin under her collarbone. But he didn't move. He was afraid of what it might say, or not say. Later, they went down to the street. The air was heavy, full of salt and night-blooming jasmine. The hotel's neon sign buzzed above them, the L flickering in and out. She wore a white dress that looked almost blue under the light. "Hungry?" he asked. "No, but I'll eat." They walked toward the harbor. The shops were closing, men pulling down the metal shutters with a clatter that echoed through the narrow street. A cat darted across, thin and fast, like something escaping. At a small cafe, they sat outside. The tables were chipped wood, the kind that had seen too many evenings and too many couples like them. The waiter came, nodded, and brought them wine without asking. It was the kind of place where you didn't need to speak much. "You ever think about leaving?" she said. "Where would I go? Anywhere that doesn't smell like the sea." "You used to love that smell." "I used to love a lot of things." He drank and said nothing. The wine was dry, with a taste like iron. It fit the mood. The harbor lights flickered against the water, breaking the reflection of the boats into trembling pieces. She leaned back, watching the people pass. A few locals, a pair of sailors, a woman in a red scarf walking alone. "They all look like they're going somewhere," she said. "They are. And us. We're here. That's not the same thing." There was a pause. He thought about the first time they met. Havana, a bar with a broken piano, her laughter cutting through the smoke. He had been younger, and she had been dangerous in the way only the living can be. "You remember that bar in Havana?" he said. She smiled. "The one with the ceiling fan that didn't work? And the old man who played dominoes with himself." "He cheated," she said. "He did." She laughed softly, the sound small but real. "God, we were stupid then. We still are." She looked at him, her eyes darker now. "Maybe, but it's different when you know you're stupid." The wine was gone. The sea kept breathing against the docks. Somewhere a boat engine coughed to life, then went quiet again. "I think I'll go back tomorrow," she said. "To where?" "Home." He nodded. He didn't ask which home she meant. There had been too many. He wanted to tell her to stay, to say something strong and clean that would matter. But every word felt like an old coin, touched too many times to be worth anything. They walked back in silence. The street lamps hummed. A boy sold flowers near the hotel, and she stopped to buy one, a white gardenia, half open. "Here," she said, holding it out. He took it. "For luck. For memory," she said. "Luck's wasted on us." In the room, the air had cooled. The window was still open, the curtain moving like a slow breath. She sat on the bed, took off her shoes, and lay back without undressing. He stood at the window, the flower in his hand. "You're really going?" "I have to." "Because of me?" "Because of everything." He turned the flower between his fingers. The petals were soft, already bruising at the edges. "Then what was all this for?" She looked at him. "You know what it was for? Don't make me name it." He didn't answer. The fan turned above them, steady and slow, like time refusing to stop. He lay beside her later, listening to her breathe. The city outside was quiet now, only the low hum of the night. He thought about the road that would take her away, about mornings without her voice, without the quiet scrape of her match lighting a cigarette. He reached for her hand under the sheet. She let him hold it. For a while they stayed that way, neither asleep nor awake, their bodies remembering what their hearts no longer could. In the early light, he woke to find her gone. The bed beside him was cold, the imprint of her body fading into the wrinkled sheet. On the table, the flower lay wilted beside an empty glass. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and saw the note by the window. It was written on hotel stationery, the same sharp handwriting as always. It said only, "Don't come after me." He folded it once, twice, and slipped it into his pocket. Outside, the morning was gray, the sea flat and pale. He stood there a long time, the air still heavy with her perfume and the salt of what was left unsaid. Then he took the last of the whiskey, finished it in one slow swallow, and went out to meet the day. Chapter 2. The Road North. He left before noon. The sun was already high, white and hard on the water. The road out of Key West cut straight through the sea, blue on both sides, a line drawn by God or by someone with his same need to leave. The radio in the old Buick worked sometimes. When it did, it played static, and through the static came bits of songs. Mostly country, sometimes a preacher. He didn't mind. The noise kept him from thinking too much. He drove with the window down, the hot wind pushing against his face. Her note sat on the seat beside him, folded small, like it wanted to disappear. By dusk, he reached Homestead. He stopped at a roadside diner with a sign that said, "Eat here and get gas." The waitress was thin, with red hair tied back. She poured his coffee without asking and smiled, because that was her job. "Long way from home," she said. "I guess." "Headed north." He nodded. "Bad time to travel. Storm's coming." "There's always a storm coming." She looked at him then, just long enough to see the kind of man he was, the kind that doesn't stay long, the kind who carries ghosts. He slept in his car that night near a field. The air smelled of rain and wet soil. He dreamed of Havana, of her in the yellow dress, dancing barefoot while the fan spun slow above the bar. In the dream, he reached for her and woke before she turned around. When morning came, the world was washed clean. He bought oranges from a boy on the roadside, ate them as he drove, the juice sticky on his hands. He thought of calling her, but he didn't know where she'd gone. Maybe back to her husband. Maybe somewhere farther, somewhere quieter. He told himself it didn't matter. He knew it did. In Jacksonville, he stopped at a cheap hotel by the river. The woman at the desk asked how long he'd stay. "Just the night," he said. "You alone?" He hesitated. "Yeah." She gave him a key and a look that said she'd heard that before. The room was small, clean enough. The wallpaper peeled at the corners. He sat on the bed, lit a cigarette, and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. He took out the note and read it again. "Don't come after me." He whispered the words aloud, as if saying them might make him believe them. That evening, he went to the bar across the street. The place smelled of beer and fried fish. A band played something slow and tired. He ordered whiskey, neat. A man 2 stools down was talking about the war. Everyone in bars talked about the war. "You serve?" the man asked him. He nodded. "Italy." The man raised his glass. "Here's to what's left of us." He clinked glasses, drank, and said nothing. The music changed, something softer, with a woman singing low. It reminded him of her voice, how she'd hum when she cooked or when she was thinking. He finished his drink and left before the song ended. The next morning, he checked out early and kept driving. The road stretched ahead like a promise he didn't believe in. By the time he reached Savannah, the sky was heavy with rain. He found a small cafe near the river, ordered black coffee, and watched the storm roll in. A woman sat at the next table, writing in a small notebook. She looked up once, met his eyes, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that invites, but the kind that acknowledges loneliness. "Looks like it's going to pour," she said. "It already is," he said. She laughed softly. "You from around here?" "No. Passing through." "Everyone's passing through somewhere," she said, and went back to her notebook. When the rain eased, he stepped outside. The air smelled of mud and magnolia. He leaned against the wall and smoked. He thought of her again, the way she used to write postcards she never mailed. Maybe she was writing one now, in some other cafe, in some other city, not sending it to him. He imagined what she'd say. "I'm fine. The weather's good. Don't worry." He would read it and not believe a word. He drove again that night, the headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. The road signs blurred past. Charleston, Fayetteville, Richmond. The miles didn't feel like distance, only delay. He stopped at a gas station just before dawn. The attendant was young, sleepy-eyed. "Long night," the boy said. "They all are," he answered. He looked at the horizon, where the first thin light was breaking. For a moment, he thought he saw her, standing in the pale morning, wearing that same white dress from Key West. He blinked, and she was gone. By the time he reached Washington, The car was running rough. He sold it outside Union Station to a man who didn't ask questions. Then he bought a train ticket north. The station was crowded, soldiers, students, people chasing something or running from it. He found a seat by the window. As the train pulled out, he took the note from his pocket one last time. He looked at it until the letters blurred. Then he tore it in half, then again, and let the pieces fall to the floor. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and felt the motion carry him, steady, relentless, like the sea. When he woke, the train was crossing into New York. The city rose gray and wide against the morning. He had no plan. That felt honest enough. He would find a room, a bar, a reason. He stepped off the train, the wind colder now, and lit a cigarette. Around him, people hurried with their coats and their purpose. He stood still, smoke curling in the air, and thought, if she's here, I'll know. He didn't know what that meant, but it was something to believe in. Chapter 3. The Crossing. She left before sunrise. The air in Key West was soft and damp, the kind that clung to the skin. She didn't look back at the hotel, though she wanted to. Looking back had always been her weakness. The road north was empty. She drove fast, the wind flattening her hair against her cheeks. She kept one hand on the wheel, one resting on the folded map. The radio played an old Cuban song, and she turned it off halfway through. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't sad, but because sadness had become a habit, and habits don't need tears. At the bridge, she slowed down. The sun came up over the water, the light sharp and white. For a moment she thought of stopping, of waiting for him to come after her. But she knew he wouldn't. Not right away. Maybe not ever. He was proud in the same way she was tired. She smiled at that, a small, bitter smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she pressed her foot on the gas and kept driving. She reached Miami by noon. The city was loud, full of music and heat. She checked into a small hotel near Biscayne Boulevard. White tiles, thin walls, a fan that rattled. The kind of place where no one asks names. She took a long shower. The water ran clear, then warm, then hot. She stayed under it until her skin flushed pink. When she stepped out, she felt lighter, like she'd rinsed away part of what she'd done, though not enough. She lay on the bed wrapped in a towel, staring at the ceiling. There were cracks up there that looked like rivers on a map. She followed them with her eyes until she fell asleep. She dreamed of him, not of Key West, but of Havana. The first time she saw him, young, sunburned, a drink in his hand, laughing at something she didn't hear. In the dream, he looked up at her. His eyes were clear, open, like he didn't know yet what the world would do to them. She wanted to stay there, in that bar with its broken fan and the old piano that never worked. But she woke instead. The light was gone. The city outside was alive again. Horns, footsteps, a radio singing from the street. She sat up, still half in the dream. That night, she walked along the bay. The water shimmered under the streetlights, soft and slow. Couples passed, arms linked, laughter trailing behind them. She wondered if she looked like one of them when they were happy, if happiness had ever really fit her. A man sold flowers from a cart. She stopped, bought a single rose, and carried it like a promise. It wilted before she reached the hotel. In the morning, she took a bus north. She liked buses, the way they hummed and rocked, the way strangers sat side by side and never spoke. She sat by the window, watched the palm trees blur into pine, the colors cooling as the miles passed. The woman beside her was knitting a baby blanket, pale blue. "Pretty," she said. "For my daughter," the woman replied, smiling. "You have children?" "No," she said. Then, after a moment, "Not anymore." The woman nodded, not asking. Some kinds of silence people understand. She changed buses in Jacksonville. The air there was different, heavier, more patient. She sat in the terminal, drinking coffee from a paper cup, watching people come and go. She wondered if he'd passed through here too, if their paths were crossing invisibly. She almost hoped not. She needed space, not the kind measured by distance, but by breath, by the small mercy of not hearing his voice in every sound. That night, she found a room in a small town she didn't know. The innkeeper was kind, older, with the quiet face of someone who's seen a lot of leaving. "Just one night?" he asked. "For now," she said. Her room overlooked a field. Crickets sang in the dark. She sat by the window with a cigarette and a notebook. She hadn't written in weeks. Words had felt useless, small things that couldn't hold what she carried. But now, Under that stillness, she began again. She wrote about light, about distance, about how love doesn't end. It just changes its shape until you don't recognize it anymore. She didn't write his name. She didn't have to. In the morning, she left early. The road stretched ahead, gray and straight. She didn't know where she was going, only that it had to be farther. At a gas station, a young man asked if she was lost. No, she said. Just traveling. He smiled. Same thing, isn't it? She laughed softly. Maybe it is. By the time she reached Charleston, she'd decided on New York. It wasn't a plan, just an instinct. Something in her wanted noise, people, a city big enough to disappear in. She bought a train ticket and slept most of the ride. When she woke, the sky was pale and endless, the tracks running through marsh and fog. Somewhere in that blur of motion, she thought she felt him again, not near, but awake, as if their hearts had agreed to beat in the same rhythm for a while longer. It made her smile, faint and sad. When the train pulled into Penn Station, she stepped out into the noise, the heat, the rush of it all. She felt the city like a tide against her skin, cold, alive, indifferent. She didn't know where to go first. The letter she'd left in Key West had said, "Don't come after me," but part of her hoped he would. She walked out into the morning crowd, her suitcase in hand, her hair tangled from sleep and wind. She looked down the street, past the taxis and the steam rising from the grates. Somewhere, she thought, he was walking too. Maybe only a few blocks away. Maybe not at all. She started walking, into the noise, into the day, into whatever came next. Chapter 4. The Winter Coast. He rented a small room above a bait shop in Maine. It smelled of salt, old wood, and fish, the kind of smell that never leaves a place, no matter how many times it's washed. The owner, a man named Kittredge, was gray and slow, with eyes that looked straight through you. He handed him the key and said, "Storm's coming tomorrow." "I heard," he said. "You here for work?" "No." Kittredge nodded, as if that answer fit most people. "Room's cheap. Heat's worse." He spent the first few days walking the shore. The tide came in hard, cold and loud. The gulls followed him, hungry and faithless. He liked the sound, that endless crash and return, the sea doing what it had always done. It made his own heartache feel small, almost decent. At night, he went to the bar by the harbor. It was quiet except for the men who drank alone and the old jukebox that skipped every third song. He didn't talk much. He drank his whiskey, smoked his cigarettes, listened to the wind batter the windows. Once, a woman sat beside him. Not young, not old. Her hands were rough from work. "You from here?" she asked. "No. Passing through." Something like that. She nodded, drank her beer. "We all are." That was the end of it. He started working on the docks just to have something to do. The pay was bad, the hours long, but it gave him a rhythm. Mornings with fog, afternoons with salt wind, nights with whiskey and silence. He liked the weight of the crates, the honest ache in his shoulders. The men didn't ask questions. They talked about boats, weather, the Red Sox. He listened, said little. One of them, a big man named Larkin, said, "You don't talk much." I said what needed saying. "Maybe," Larkin said. "But sometimes what needs saying ain't the same as what needs hearing." He didn't answer. The man meant well, and meaning well had never helped anyone. Sometimes, at dawn, he'd stand at the end of the pier, smoking, watching the sea lift and fall. He'd think of her then, how she'd look with her hair tied back, the sun on her face, the way she'd laugh low when she didn't mean to. He'd wonder where she was. Then he'd remind himself it didn't matter. Then he'd admit it did. The mind lies to the heart, but only for a while. Winter came hard. The town went quiet except for the wind and the church bell that rang at noon. He read in the evenings, mostly old books left by whoever had rented the room before him. Steinbeck, London, a tattered volume of Yeats. He liked the words, though they didn't fix anything. Nothing fixes anything, he thought. It just makes the pain more polite. One night, he found a letter in his coat pocket. Not hers, something old, something from years before. A note she'd written once in Havana, folded small, forgotten. "Don't forget the color of the sea here. It's not the same anywhere else." He stared at it until the letters blurred. He could still smell the rum and the sweat and the heat of that day. He put it back in his pocket and went outside. The snow was falling hard now, soft flakes vanishing into the dark water. He walked to the edge of the dock, held the letter over the sea, and let it go. The wind caught it, spun it once, twice, and dropped it into the black. He watched it float for a moment, then sink. Later, in the bar, Larkin said, "You look like you lost something." He smiled. "Maybe I did. You'll find it." He shook his head. "Some things don't want to be found." Larkin nodded, poured him another drink. "To the ones that got away." He raised his glass. To them. They drank, and the wind howled outside. And somewhere deep in his chest something softened. Not healed, but eased. That night, he dreamed of her again. Not Key West, not Havana, but snow. She was standing on the pier in the same white dress, barefoot, her hair full of frost. She turned toward him, smiled, and said, "It's not over." He woke before dawn, the dream sharp in his throat. He lay there, listening to the sea pound the rocks, and thought, maybe it isn't. But he didn't move. He just lay still, waiting for the light to come. Chapter 5. The Upper West Wind. She found a room on West 74th, 3 flights up. The hallway smelled of varnish and old steam heat. The window looked out over the river, where the water moved dark and slow. At night she could hear the ferries sound their horns, low and patient. She took work at a small art gallery. Nothing grand. Portraits, seascapes, the kind of paintings that sit politely on rented walls. The owner was a quiet man who spoke more to the pictures than to people. She liked that. It kept the days simple. Most mornings she stopped for coffee at the corner shop. The same man was there every day, reading the paper, never smiling. After a week, he started nodding to her. After 2, he said, "Cold today." She answered, "They all are." That was enough. The city had its own weather. Wind that came in gusts between buildings. Rain that fell sideways. Nights that never really slept. She walked a lot. Up Broadway, down to the river, sometimes through the park when it was empty. The movement helped her breathe. Once, in a small bookstore, she found a map of Cuba pinned to the wall. She stood looking at it for a long time, tracing the coastline with her eyes. The clerk said, "You from there?" "Once," she said. He nodded. "Hard place to forget." She smiled. All good places are. Winter deepened. The gallery was slow. Sometimes she stayed late, sitting at the front desk, watching the snow gather against the window. She started writing again. Short notes. Fragments. Sentences that didn't need to end. One night, she wrote, "Love doesn't die. It goes quiet." Then she tore the page out and folded it into her coat pocket. She didn't know why she kept doing that, writing things she wouldn't send. Maybe it was a way of listening to herself. Maybe it was the only prayer she still believed in. She met a woman named Claire at the gallery, a painter who talked with her hands. Claire had been married twice and said she was done with the idea. They had coffee after work sometimes. "You're not from here," Claire said once. "No. Someone waiting for you somewhere?" She thought for a moment. "Not anymore." Claire looked at her. "That's a kind of freedom. Or a kind of lie." Claire laughed softly. "They're close enough to the same thing." On Sundays, she went to the museum. She liked the stillness there, the sound of shoes on marble. The paintings didn't ask anything of her. They just stayed. One afternoon she stood before a seascape, gray water, a small boat, one figure rowing alone. The label said "Artist Unknown." She whispered, "I know him." A guard looked over, puzzled. She smiled and walked on. Spring came late that year. The river thawed, and the city smelled of wet stone. She opened her window for the first time in months. The air felt new, though she didn't. She started dreaming again. Small dreams, nothing grand. A house with light in every room. A table with 2 cups. Sometimes he was there, sometimes not. The feeling was always the same. Something unfinished but not broken. One morning, a letter arrived at the gallery. No return address. The handwriting was strange, uneven, careful. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I was by the sea this winter. It's the same color you said it was." No name. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it, slipped it into her notebook, and went back to work. Her hands trembled a little, but she smiled. That evening, she walked down to the river. The sun was low, the air cool. She stood there until the light went out of the water. Somewhere far away, a ship's horn sounded, a long, low note that felt like a memory returning from distance. She whispered, "All right," and turned toward home. Chapter 6. The Breakwater. The snow began to melt in March. Thin streams ran down the gutters and pooled in the cracks of the pier. The air had that salt, iron smell that meant winter was leaving but not yet gone. He still worked the docks. The boats came back in slow, the nets heavy with cold fish. The men talked more now, about the season ahead, about money, about women who might still be waiting. He listened, kept his hands busy, said little. One afternoon Larkin called out, "You'll head south when it warms?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Can't stay here forever." "Why not?" Larkin laughed. "Because nothing does." That night, he went back to the room above the shop. The stove ticked, throwing weak heat. He opened the small window to let in the smell of thawing seaweed and wood smoke. He sat at the table with a bottle, the kind that didn't need a glass. There was a stack of letters beside him, unopened, sent from no one he knew. Old mail that had belonged to the previous tenant. He read them anyway, just for the company of words. Most were from fishermen to wives or sons. Simple things. Caught a good haul today. Wind coming in hard from the east. Tell her I'll be home soon. He liked the plainness of them. They made the world feel honest again. The next morning, a small package arrived at the bait shop, addressed to him. No return name. Only a city, New York. Inside was a folded piece of paper, nothing else. "It goes quiet," it said. He stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was hers. That night, he walked to the breakwater. The sea was restless, throwing itself against the rocks, as if it wanted to come ashore and tell its own story. He stood there a long while, the note in his pocket, the cold wind cutting at his face. He wanted to believe it was a message, not just words caught in the current. He wanted to think she was alive somewhere, moving forward. He whispered, "All right," though he didn't know what he was agreeing to. Days passed. He began to pack. Not all at once. First the books, then the few clothes that weren't work-worn. He left the stove, the chair, the bottle half full. The room had never really been his. When Kittredge came up with the rent book, he said, "Heading out." "Looks that way." "Where to?" "South." Kittredge nodded, slow. "The sea'll be waiting either way." He smiled at that. It always is. He took the morning bus. The road wound through gray woods, past rivers breaking loose from ice. At a stop outside Portland, he stepped out for a cigarette. The air smelled faintly of spring, the kind of smell that made you think of starting over, even if you didn't believe in it. He thought of her, of the city she might be in, the crowd she might walk through. He pictured her stopping on a corner, turning as if she'd heard his name on the wind. He let the image stay, just long enough to feel it. Then he crushed the cigarette and climbed back onto the bus. By nightfall, he was halfway down the coast. The lights of the highway blurred into a steady river of gold. He watched them until his eyes stung. He wasn't sure what waited for him. He only knew he couldn't stay still any longer. Somewhere ahead, the sea was warmer, and the world was wide again. He leaned his head against the window, listened to the rhythm of the road, and thought of her last word on the page. Quiet. He closed his eyes and let the sound of the wheels carry him toward it. Chapter 7. The Room with the River Light. The days had lengthened. The trees in Riverside Park were just beginning to show green. From her window, she could see the river turning silver in the mornings, a slow shimmer that looked like forgiveness. She still worked at the gallery, though she no longer stayed late. The owner had taken to closing early, saying people bought fewer paintings when the weather was good. She didn't mind. It gave her evenings. Sometimes she walked to the river after work. Sometimes she took the subway downtown and sat in the same cafe for an hour, writing in her notebook. The words came easier now. They didn't hurt as much. She had started to draw again, too. Small sketches, nothing she would show. Boats, rooftops, faces she almost remembered. One afternoon, Claire came by the gallery. She wore her usual paint-stained coat and carried a small canvas wrapped in paper. "I brought something," Claire said. She unwrapped it. The painting showed a woman standing on a pier, her hair blowing, a storm far behind her. The sea was rough, but the horizon was calm. "It's beautiful," she said. Claire smiled. "I thought you might like it. It's called Quiet Water." She looked at it for a long time. "Did you paint this for me?" Claire shrugged. "Maybe for both of us." They laughed a little, and it felt good. That night, she hung the painting above her desk. It made the room feel larger, as if the wall had opened into another world. She sat looking at it, the river light shifting across the glass. She took out the note he'd sent. "It goes quiet." She placed it under the painting, held there by a small stone she'd picked up years ago in Havana. She whispered, "It does," and closed her eyes. Weeks passed. The city turned warm and restless. People filled the sidewalks. Music came from open windows. She let the noise move through her, without changing her. One morning, at the post office, she saw a man in line ahead of her. Tall, sun-browned, a jacket too light for the season. He turned slightly, and for a second she felt her chest tighten. But it wasn't him. She smiled at herself, small and tired. The mind sees what it wants to see. She mailed her letter anyway. Just a small envelope addressed to herself, a trick she'd learned from loneliness. It said, "Still here, still breathing." In July, the gallery closed for 2 weeks. The owner went to Paris. Claire went upstate to paint barns. She stayed in the city. Each morning she walked to the river, bought coffee, and sat on a bench facing west. She liked the ferry horns, the wind, the smell of diesel and tide. Sometimes she brought her notebook, sometimes not. One afternoon, she opened it and wrote, "If he ever comes back, I hope the world is kind to him." Then she closed it. She didn't tear the page out. She didn't need to anymore. A storm rolled in that night. The sky went the color of pewter. She stood by the window watching the rain fall sideways, the streets shining like mirrors. In the glass, she saw her own reflection, older, steadier, still alive. She smiled, the kind of smile that knows itself. She turned off the light, left the window open, and let the sound of rain fill the room. Somewhere out there, she thought, the sea was breaking on another shore. She didn't need to know which one. Chapter 8. The Long Road Back. He rode the bus through Delaware in the dark. Rain streaked the windows, the lights of small towns flickering past like matches struck and gone. Most of the passengers slept. He couldn't. At dawn, the road leveled out. The rain eased. He watched the sky turn pale, and then the first thin lights spread over the fields. Somewhere a train whistled, low and far off. It sounded like a promise he no longer trusted. He thought about turning around. He didn't. He wasn't chasing her, he told himself. He was only following the same pull that had brought him north before. Quiet, patient, without reason. In Baltimore, he stepped off the bus to stretch his legs. The air was warm already, heavy with the smell of rain on asphalt. He bought coffee from a stand. A man beside him said, "Headed home," he said, trying to find where that is. The man nodded. "Ain't that the truth?" They didn't speak again. The bus horn sounded, and he climbed back on. By the time they reached Virginia, the land had turned green again. Pines, rivers wide and slow. He felt something loosen inside him, the way a knot gives after a long pull. He stopped for a few days in Norfolk, found a room above a grocery. The owner was a widow who talked too much, but she made good coffee. He helped her fix a window that wouldn't shut. "You're handy," she said. "I used to be." She smiled. Used to be's better than never was. He liked her for that. The sea was close here, but softer than in Maine. The air carried salt and heat. In the mornings, he walked along the docks. The boats were smaller, painted in colors that had faded to kindness: blue, yellow, green. He sat on a bench and watched the tide come in. Sometimes he wrote in a small notebook, the one he'd carried since Key West. Not letters, not even sentences. Just fragments. Water, wind, her voice in the rain. Stillness is its own kind of motion. It goes quiet. One evening, he went into a bar near the harbor. It was crowded, loud with talk and music. He sat at the counter, ordered whiskey. The bartender, a young woman with tired eyes, said, "You don't look like a man who drinks for fun." He smiled. "I'm not." "Then you're in the right place," she said, and moved on. He liked her honesty. It made the room easier to bear. After a week, he bought a small second-hand car, a dented Ford with more rust than paint. He didn't plan it. He just wanted to move at his own speed again. He drove along the coast roads, windows open, the wind in his hair. The radio played old songs, and he let them fill the spaces he couldn't name. Sometimes, without meaning to, he spoke aloud. He said things like, "You'd like this," or "Look at that sky." The words went nowhere, but they felt right in the air. In South Carolina, he stopped at a diner by the beach. The waitress brought him pie and coffee. "You traveling alone?" she asked. "Seems that way." "You staying long?" "No, just passing through." She nodded. "Everyone says that, but sometimes they don't." He smiled. "Maybe I won't either." Outside, the sea was a wide gray sheet under a flat sun. He watched it until the coffee cooled. That night, he found a motel on the edge of a town called Beaufort. The neon sign buzzed. Half the letters were dark. The room smelled of bleach and old rain. He didn't mind. He sat on the bed, opened his notebook again, and wrote. Somewhere she's walking beside water too. He closed it and looked out the window. The moon hung low over the dunes, pale and distant. He whispered, "All right," as if she could hear it. When he finally lay down, he dreamed of her again, not in Havana or Key West, but New York. He'd never been there long, but in the dream he knew the street, trees, river light, the shape of her window against the dusk. She turned, as if she'd felt him watching. Then the dream dissolved, soft as smoke. He woke before dawn, the air still and warm. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and thought, almost there. He didn't know what there meant anymore. But the thought stayed with him as the first light broke and the sea began to move again. Chapter 9. The Nearness. The heat came early that year. The city was slow under it, as if moving through syrup. Even the pigeons looked tired. She kept the fan by the window running day and night, the steady hum a kind of comfort. Sometimes she sat by it with her coffee, eyes half closed, listening to the river outside. The sound changed with the season, deeper, slower, like a voice growing old in a good way. One morning, she woke before dawn. The air was still, the sky pale gray. She made tea and stood by the window. There was a freighter moving upriver, lights dim in the mist. For a second, she felt something rise in her chest, a recognition she couldn't explain. She said aloud, "It's you again," though she didn't know what she meant by it. At the gallery, things were quiet. Fewer visitors, slower days. She didn't mind. She had grown to like the hush between people. It made room for thought. A man came in once, late in the afternoon. He was tall, sun-darkened, the sleeves of his shirt rolled to his elbows. He looked at the paintings without saying a word. When he turned, she saw it wasn't him. But her pulse had already betrayed her. He nodded politely, bought a small seascape, and left. She stood at the window long after, watching the street until he was gone. Claire teased her later, saying, "You always look like you're waiting for someone who's already missed the train." She smiled. "Maybe I am." Claire lit a cigarette, then stopped standing on the platform. They both laughed, but the words stayed. That night, she walked down to the river. The air smelled of summer rain coming. She sat on her usual bench, the one near the old ferry dock. A man was playing guitar nearby, slow and low, singing something about distance and roads. She closed her eyes and listened. The melody felt familiar, like something she'd once heard through an open window, years ago. She stayed until the rain began, soft at first, then hard enough to send people running. She didn't move. The water hit her face, ran down her arms, and she felt alive again, not young, but awake. A few days later, a postcard arrived. No return address. Just a picture of the Carolina coast. Dunes, a gray sea, 2 gulls over the surf. On the back, in his hand, still moving, thought of the quiet water. She sat at the table a long while, the card trembling slightly in her fingers. The writing was calm, almost shy. She traced the words with her thumb, then laid it beside the old note. "It goes quiet." Now they spoke to each other, those 2 fragments. She realized she didn't need more. The message was already complete. In the weeks that followed, she began to paint again. Not carefully, not for anyone. Big strokes, small colors. A series of harbors, each one emptier than the last, until only the sky remained. When Claire came by and saw them, she said, "They look like waiting." She answered, "They're not waiting. They're breathing." Claire smiled. "That's better." By August, the air turned heavy with storms again. She took to walking in the evenings, after the thunder passed. The city smelled of wet stone and lilac. Once, crossing the park, she felt that same pull, sudden, unmistakable, as if someone somewhere had just said her name. She stopped, looked around. No one. Just the hush after rain, the lamps glowing pale in the mist. She smiled, small and certain. She said, "All right," softly, echoing words he'd once used and she'd never forgotten. She didn't know he was driving north again that same night, windows down, the sea fading in his mirror. She didn't need to know. The heart sometimes hears what the world keeps quiet. She stood there a while longer, feeling the air settle around her, warm and alive, and thought, maybe the story isn't about finding each other again. Maybe it's about learning how to keep moving without losing what was true. Then she walked on, steady and unhurried, the city lights flickering like the start of something merciful. Chapter 10. The Ferry Dock. He drove into the city at dusk. The skyline was low in the gold light, buildings catching the last sun like shards of glass. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that the streets felt familiar in the way memory always is. Not precise, just enough to guide. The Ford rumbled down the west side highway. The wind pressed against him, carrying smells of salt, exhaust, and the faint hint of rain. Somewhere in the city, she was moving too, the same currents, the same air threading between them. He parked near the ferry terminal. The Hudson was silver beneath the fading light. Ferries slid quietly through the water, the engines humming like distant voices. He walked onto the dock, the boards creaking underfoot. A woman in white sat on a bench a few steps away, head down, hair caught in the wind. He stopped. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. His chest tightened, a recognition that had nothing to do with sight. He took a slow step forward, then paused. He was afraid that moving closer might break the spell, that the world might rearrange itself the moment he did something obvious. The ferry horn sounded, long and low. It echoed across the water, vibrating through the air, through the boards, through him. She raised her head slightly, sensing the vibration. For a fraction of a second, her eyes lifted toward the water. She didn't see him, not yet, but she felt him in the space beside her. He stayed still, hands in his pockets, letting the wind carry the moment between them. A child ran past them, laughing, chasing a paper boat along the edge of the dock. The sound was small, bright, ordinary. She smiled faintly. He almost smiled too. Almost. The ferry arrived, its steel hull grinding, its lights cutting across the water. People began to board. The woman in white stood and walked toward the gangway. He followed a few steps behind, careful, measured. He caught glimpses of her through the crowd. The sway of her hair, the tilt of her shoulders, the way she held herself steady in the rush of people. On the ferry, she chose a seat facing the water, near the window. He found one across the aisle, not too close, not too far. He watched her as she settled in, the way light moved across her face. She looked out at the river, unaware, or pretending to be, that someone was sitting on the other side of the cabin watching her. She shifted slightly. The sunlight caught a strand of hair, lifted it like it wanted to escape. He remembered the way it had fallen in Key West, in Havana, in rooms he could still feel. The boat moved slowly north. Waves slapped against the hull. The wind slipped through the open doors, tugging papers and hair and sleeves. He could have spoken. He could have said her name, just to hear it in the space between them. But he didn't. She felt him there, though, not with sight or sound, but with that quiet sense, the same pulse that had drawn her north and him south for months. She didn't turn. The ferry docked. People got off, shuffling in the heat and the salt air. He followed her at a distance, careful to stay unnoticed. She moved with her usual rhythm, quiet, certain, aware of everything, nothing waiting. The city smelled of warm asphalt, river, and something sweet from a nearby bakery. She paused at a corner, looking up at a building she didn't know. He stopped too, just beyond the curb, watching. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of coffee, rain, and faint perfume. He inhaled sharply, aware of it. She moved again, disappearing down the street, her pace steady. He followed, careful, feeling that pull tighten. At nightfall, she reached her apartment. The streetlights glowed, warm against the walls, and she entered without noticing him across the street, walking past the corner, just long enough to glimpse the light in her window. He stood there a moment, feeling the space between them shrink. He whispered into the quiet air, almost. Then he walked on, letting the night carry him further, letting the city fold around them both, holding the possibility of tomorrow. Chapter 11. The Meeting. The cafe smelled of bread and coffee. Steam rose from the cups like ghosts. She sat at a small table by the window, notebook open, pen in hand. She had told herself she wouldn't look for him, not here, not now. The door opened. A bell rang softly. The air shifted before she saw him. He walked in slowly. No rush. Hands in his pockets. Coat damp from a sudden drizzle. He paused near the counter, ordered nothing. He scanned the room. Her chest tightened. Something rose, low, certain, like the sea against rocks. She didn't move. He saw her then. Not through the window, not across the street, not in a dream. He saw her here. She looked up. Their eyes met. The room, the people, the warm smell of the cafe, all of it receded. The only thing left was her, sitting quietly, holding a pen like a wand. He stepped forward. She stayed where she was, waiting. "Hello," he said. His voice was low, the kind that had always carried the weight of the sea. "Hello," she said. Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile, almost a question. He hesitated, unsure of what to do first. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. He sat. They didn't speak at once, just looked at each other, listening to the quiet hum of the cafe around them. Steam from the coffee swirled between them. Outside, rain dripped from the awning. "Finally," she said, "you came." "I did," he said. She studied him, saw the months of travel in the lines of his face, the tiredness in his shoulders, the careful way he moved. "You've been far," she said. "Far enough," he answered, "and close enough to know where you are." She nodded, slowly. The words were simple. Nothing more was needed. They talked then, softly, carefully, about the weather, about the river, about the books they had read, the coffee they liked. They avoided the things that hurt the most. Yet each small sentence carried months of absence, miles of longing, years of almost losing each other. "Do you want to stay?" she asked finally. "I don't know," he said, "but I know I'm here." She smiled, a little stronger now. "Then maybe that's enough for today." Outside, the rain eased. The light shifted, golden on the wet pavement. People passed by, unaware. But in that small cafe, the world had stopped. He reached for her hand, just the edge of it. She didn't pull away. The warmth of it was enough. She said, "It's been quiet for a long time." "Too long," he said. "Then let's not make it quieter," she said. He nodded. They sat like that for a while, letting the small, ordinary moments stretch into something extraordinary. The storm inside them had settled, only enough left to remind them they were alive. When they finally left, the rain had stopped. The streets shone, slick and clean, reflecting the first light of evening. They walked together without speaking, side by side, the space between them just right. She glanced at him, faintly curious. "Where now?" "Wherever we go," he said. "The road doesn't have to be empty anymore." She nodded. For the first time in months, the future felt like a place they could step into together. And somewhere, beyond the city, the river moved as if to carry them forward, slow, steady, and unrelenting. Chapter 12, Morning Light. The morning came slow, through the blinds. She woke first, watching the river light spill across the floor. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee, warm and soft. He was still asleep beside her, quiet, even in rest. She didn't move at first. She just watched him, the line of his jaw, the curve of his shoulders, the way his hand rested against the sheet. Months of absence and miles of road had brought him here. Finally, she smiled, small, and let herself breathe. He woke with a stretch, the morning light catching his eyes. "You're awake," he said softly. "I've been watching the river," she replied. He sat up, rubbing his face. "It's early." "Not for the river," she said. He looked out the window. The water moved slow, silver under the light. He nodded, understanding without words. They dressed quietly, side by side. Breakfast was simple: bread, butter, and coffee. They didn't need conversation at first. Each small act of making, pouring, buttering, passing the cup, felt significant. "Do you want to go out?" he asked finally. "Where?" "Anywhere." "The street." "The park." "The river." "Then yes," she said. They walked down to the river. The streets were wet from an overnight drizzle. Puddles reflected the sky, the buildings, the people passing, unaware of the history threading through the air. They didn't hold hands at first, just walked side by side. The space between them felt measured, careful. Sometimes he glanced at her. Sometimes she glanced at him. Neither spoke. When they reached the ferry dock, she said, "Do you want to go?" He nodded. "Yes." The ferry moved across the river. The water rippled in silver and gray. They stood together at the railing, the wind lifting hair and coats. "It's the same river," she said. "Everywhere's the same river," he said. "If you know how to watch it." She smiled, small and patient. "I think I'm learning." They stayed silent, letting the ferry rock them, letting the city rise around them. No one spoke. No one needed to. After lunch, they walked through the park. The trees had leaves now, soft and new. Children ran past. Dogs barked. A man played a violin on a bench. They found a quiet spot on the grass, sat down. He leaned back, watching the sky. She leaned against him, shoulder to shoulder. "You feel different," she said. "I do," he said. "Better. Less lost." She nodded. "Me too." They talked little, mostly about small things, the books they were reading, the smells of the city, the way the light looked on water. Every detail felt like a gift, a way to measure the months they had lost. When the sun began to dip, they walked home slowly, the streets glowing in gold and shadow. Inside, they didn't rush. He poured coffee. She sat near the window. Sometimes they looked at each other. Sometimes they didn't. At night, they ate quietly. Afterward, they stood by the window, listening to the river. She whispered, "It's been a long time." "Yes," he said. "Too long." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move. They stayed like that until the night grew thick and the river deepened in shadow. By the time they went to bed, the city had gone quiet. Their hands found each other under the sheets. No words were needed. The first day together had been ordinary, full of small moments, yet extraordinary in its completeness. Outside, the river carried on, relentless and patient. Inside, they finally understood that the storm wasn't over, but the quiet between them had become something solid, something lasting. Chapter 13. The First Fracture. The morning was warm, too warm for the city in early August. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, catching dust motes like tiny fireflies. She woke first, as usual, and poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. He didn't stir. She carried the mugs to the balcony. The river stretched out, silver and slow, unchanging. He joined her after a moment. He looked tired, more than the road should have left him. "Long night?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just thinking." She nodded, unsure if she should ask more. The tension didn't start with words. It started with small things. The way he left his coat on the floor, the way she made the bed differently than he preferred, the way each of them paused in the kitchen, waiting for the other to speak first. By noon, it became words. "You're quiet today," she said. "I'm not," he replied, and immediately regretted it. "Yes, you are," she said. Her voice wasn't raised. It wasn't angry. Just clear, precise, a scalpel of honesty. He looked at her. He wanted to laugh, wanted to pull her close, wanted to apologize. But instead, he said, "I've got things on my mind." "So do I," she said. "But I talk." He opened his mouth, then closed it. They spent the morning in separate rooms. The apartment felt smaller than usual. Coffee cooled. Papers on the table rustled as she moved them. He stared out the window, watching the river flow. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper. "I shouldn't have come here like this." "I didn't mean to." She shook her head. "You can't control what comes with you. You can only see it, only feel it. And sometimes that hurts." "Yes," he said. "Exactly." They met again in the kitchen, awkward and careful. "Lunch?" she asked. "Sure," he said. They sat across from each other. The plates were small. They didn't touch. Words came slow, fragmented. But even in that discomfort, there was intimacy. The shared quiet, the habit of looking for the other across a table or a room. By late afternoon, a storm rolled in. Thunder low, wind ruffling the curtains. Rain hit the window hard. They watched it together in silence. The river blurred into silver and gray. "I don't want this to ruin us," she said. "It won't," he said. But he didn't know if that was true. "It's only the first day we're really living together," she said. "There'll be more moments like this." "I know," he said. "And I'm willing." She reached for his hand, small and careful. He took it. The warmth was enough to anchor them. When night came, they lay in bed, side by side. Not touching yet, not completely healed. Just near each other. "Storm's out there," she said. "Yeah," he said. "And in here, too." "Then let's not fight it," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "We'll get through it." Outside, the rain tapped the window in steady rhythm. Inside, they listened, learning that storms could come and go, and that the quiet after might be even more precious than the calm before. Chapter 14. Afternoon Light. The city was warm, the streets heavy with August air. She opened the window wide, letting the river light spill into the room. He was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. The sound of the knife against the cutting board was steady, almost meditative. She watched him for a moment. The tension of yesterday softened by this ordinary act. "You always cut too fast," she said lightly. "I like precision," he replied, smiling without looking up. She came over and leaned against the counter. "Sometimes it feels like you're trying to fix everything all at once." He paused. "Maybe I am." "You don't have to," she said. Lunch was quiet. They didn't need words to fill the space, only the small gestures, passing a plate, stirring the soup, letting the sunlight fall between them. Afterward, she suggested a walk along the river. The streets shimmered with heat, the air carrying the smell of wet asphalt and blooming flowers. They moved slowly, side by side, hands brushing at times, letting the contact come naturally. "I don't want to fight like yesterday," she said. "I know," he said. "I was too much inside myself. Too quiet." "I'm sorry." "It's okay," she said. "We both have things to learn." They stopped at the ferry dock. The river stretched wide and still, sunlight glittering across the surface. He watched her watch the water, the way the light touched her hair, the tilt of her head. He felt the weight of months of absence. And then, more surprisingly, the relief of presence. "Do you remember that first ferry ride?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I do. You didn't notice me then, but I noticed you." She laughed softly. "I might have felt it." Quietly, they found a bench under a tree and sat. The conversation turned to small things. Books they were reading, paintings they'd seen, places they wanted to visit. Nothing urgent, nothing monumental, yet everything mattered. At one point, he reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. The touch was simple, steady, and it carried more weight than anything they'd said in months. "Being here with you," he said, "makes the storm feel bearable." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "It always did," she said. By late afternoon, they returned home. The apartment smelled of bread, coffee, and the faint trace of rain from earlier. She poured tea. He moved the chairs closer to the window. They didn't need to sit together on the couch. Sitting near each other was enough. "Do you think we'll ever stop being careful?" he asked. "Maybe not," she said. "But maybe that's the point. Care keeps us alive, keeps us aware of each other." He nodded. "Then I'll be careful, always." She smiled. "I'll be careful too." At night, they lay together. Not pressed close, not entangled, but side by side, hands brushing, breath in rhythm. The city outside glowed softly in streetlights and distant neon. Somewhere beyond, the river moved, constant and patient. They fell asleep to its sound, not needing to speak, not needing to decide. They had reached a quiet understanding that love, even stormy love, could settle into the spaces between ordinary moments, carrying both tenderness and the scars of absence. Chapter 15, The Visitor. The morning was bright, almost cruel in its clarity. The city seemed too clean, too orderly, after the soft storms of the last weeks. She was in the kitchen, making coffee. He was reading at the table, the sunlight catching the edges of his notebook. The doorbell rang. They both froze. Not alarmed, exactly, but cautious. "Who could that be?" she asked. "I don't know," he said, his voice low. She opened the door. A man stood there, tall, neat, with the faintest trace of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello," he said. "I'm looking for Ms. Caldwell." "That's me," she said. He glanced past her. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered, keeping his hands in view, polite but deliberate. He introduced himself as a representative from a publisher, a gallery book project, long delayed, now ready for printing. She had almost forgotten about it. The timing felt invasive, though, cutting through the fragile calm of their morning. He spoke quickly, efficiently. She answered in measured tones, keeping her gaze mostly on her coffee. He didn't notice the way her hand rested briefly against his shoulder across the counter, a small signal of grounding and reassurance. He didn't see the way her eyes flicked to him, silently asking for support. After he left, she sat heavily at the table. "That felt abrupt," she said. "It did," he agreed. "Are you okay?" "I will be." He nodded. "I can stay. Or get out of your way." "Stay," she said. "I don't want to be alone right now." He reached for her hand across the table, and she let him take it. The contact was simple, but it reminded them both of the quiet trust they had built. They spent the afternoon together, sorting papers, checking proofs, planning corrections. The task was mundane, yet intimate. Small acts of cooperation, shared glances, occasional laughter. At one point, she said, "You make it easier." "Make what easier?" he asked. "This. Life. Everything." He looked at her. "We make it easier together." By evening, the city was quiet again. The streets glowed with the soft heat of early August. They walked to the river, hand in hand, letting the external demands of the day drift behind them. "Storms come in many forms," she said. He nodded. "Some we can see, some we carry inside." She squeezed his hand. "But we face them together." Yes, he said. Together, they stood at the ferry dock, watching the water. The current moved steadily, patient, unhurried. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then she rested her head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her. The world could wait. For now, the river, the city, and each other were enough. Chapter 16. The Map of Days. The morning smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Sunlight fell across the table in sharp angles. She sat with her notebook open. He poured tea, careful not to spill, careful in every movement, as if gentleness could shape the day. I've been thinking, she said, tracing a line on the page. He looked up. About what comes next. Us. Life. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing. They didn't speak immediately after. The silence was not empty. It was full of all the months they had lost, all the roads they had traveled, and all the quiet they had waded through. They made a list. Not a formal one, just notes on scraps of paper. Apartments, jobs, travel, small dreams. I'd like a place with a river view, she said. And I'd like a small garden, he said. Compromise? Compromise, he agreed, smiling. The list grew slowly. Cities, books, paintings, morning routines, coffee habits. Each note was a promise, a consideration, a stitch in the fabric of a life they were building together. After breakfast, they walked along the river. The air was warm, soft with late summer. Children played, dogs ran, ferries slid across the water like steady hearts. You know, he said, we're actually planning our life. Feels strange, she admitted. Almost like we're talking too much about what's ahead instead of being here. He reached for her hand. Being here is how we plan it. Every step, every choice, every small moment, it all counts. She smiled, leaning into him. Then let's keep doing that. They stopped at a small park bench. A man played a violin, slow and melancholy. The music hung in the air between them, quiet and persistent. I like that we can talk about the future without pretending it's certain, she said. Certainty isn't life, he said. But patience is. They sat in silence, listening to the music, watching the river move, understanding that a life together wasn't a single moment, but a series of moments stitched carefully into days. By evening, they returned home. The apartment smelled faintly of tea and rain from a sudden shower. They cooked dinner together, simple vegetables, bread, and wine. I like this, she said. The ordinary. Us doing ordinary things together. Ordinary can be extraordinary, he said. They ate slowly, laughed softly, shared quiet glances that said everything they didn't need to put into words. At night, they sat by the window, hands intertwined, looking at the river. The city lights reflected in the water, gold and white and steady. You think we're ready? She asked. For what? He said. For life. Together. He smiled, brushing her hair from her face. We'll never be completely ready, but we'll be together. That's enough. She rested her head against his shoulder. He held her tighter. The river moved outside. The city breathed. And inside, they began to draw the map of days they would walk together, uncertain but unafraid, storm and calm entwined. Chapter 17. The Call. The morning was humid, thick with the smell of wet asphalt from last night's rain. She was making coffee, humming softly, when the phone rang. He answered it first. The voice on the other end was clipped, urgent, unfamiliar. A family member of an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, asking for help. Something serious, something immediate. He hung up. The line between calm and urgency had been crossed in one breath. I have to go, he said. She froze. Where? South. Not far, but I need to leave this morning. She didn't say anything at first. The apartment felt too still, the river light harsh. I can come with you, she said finally. No, he said. It's better if I handle this alone. It won't take long. I promise. She nodded slowly. Okay, but be careful. He kissed her forehead. Always. The day stretched long for her. She walked along the river, coffee in hand, phone at her side. Every time it rang, her heart jumped. She imagined every scenario, some manageable, some catastrophic. By evening, he still hadn't called. She sat at the window, listening to the city hum, her mind restless. When he finally arrived, late, she opened the door before he knocked. His coat was damp. His eyes were tired. I'm sorry, he said. It took longer than I thought. Everything's okay now. She studied him. You said that, she said. But you could have been hurt. You could have. I know, he interrupted gently. And I thought about it every minute. She nodded, swallowing hard. Good. I need to know that you think of me. They sat at the table. Dinner was quiet, simple. He poured wine. She watched him, measuring the fatigue in his movements, the faint tremor in his hands. You handled it well, she said. I did what I could, he said. But I realized, I don't want to face things like that without you. She reached for his hand. You won't have to. Not if I can help it. He held her hand tightly. Then we'll face it together. Always. Later, they walked along the river. The night was humid, heavy with the scent of flowers and wet pavement. Life will keep throwing storms at us, she said. Yes, he said, and some we can't avoid. But we can face them together. She leaned against him. The river moved below, unhurried, patient. The city lights shimmered across the water, a constant reminder that the world keeps turning, even when fear presses close. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The storm had come and passed, and they had survived it, not because the world had bent to them, but because they had bent toward each other. Chapter 18. The Rhythm of Days. The mornings were slower now. She woke first, as usual, and made coffee. He followed, barefoot on the cool wood floors, the air carrying the scent of bread baking in the oven. Do you ever think we'll stop noticing the small things? She asked, stirring her cup. No, he said. The small things are the only things that matter. She smiled. Good. I like noticing with you. They fell into a rhythm. Work, meals, walks along the river, quiet evenings in the apartment. Life was ordinary, yet extraordinary in its shared simplicity. One afternoon, she brought home a small plant. Thought it could live here, she said. He crouched to place it on the windowsill. A little life inside the apartment. I like that. She laughed. Careful. Don't let it die on me. I won't, he said, and for once she believed him. Friends began to visit. Claire came with paint-stained hands and news of a new exhibition. They laughed together, drank wine, shared meals. Even ordinary conversations became lessons in attention and patience. Your apartment smells like a gallery, Claire said one evening. It's not the apartment, she said. It's us learning to live together. He nodded. Exactly. They traveled occasionally. Short trips down the coast, quiet weekends in small towns, ferry rides that reminded them of the early days. One evening, on the deck of a ferry, she rested her head on his shoulder. I think we're good at this, she said. We're learning, he corrected gently. Learning feels like living, she said. Yes, he said, and I want to keep learning with you. Back home, the river moved in silver currents beneath their window. Sunlight warmed the room. They spent hours reading, talking, cooking, sometimes not speaking at all. The silence was never empty. It was full of trust, memory, and possibility. Do you ever regret anything? She asked, watching him sip tea. No, he said. Not even the storms. They brought us here. She nodded, understanding. Even the ones that frightened us. Especially those, he said. By night, they lay together, hands intertwined. Outside, the city hummed softly. The river shimmered beneath the moonlight. They didn't need words. The ordinary had become extraordinary. The storm had passed, and in the quiet, they had found something lasting. The map of days they were building wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was theirs, stitched carefully with patience, care, and love. And that was enough. Chapter 19. The Letter. The morning was overcast, soft gray light spilling through the blinds. She sat at the table, her notebook open, a pen in hand, though she hadn't written in hours. He was in the kitchen, humming quietly, the scent of toast drifting through the apartment. Everything seemed normal, ordinary, safe, until the mail came. She opened it first. A thin envelope, heavier than most. No return address. She turned it over, felt the weight in her hand. He came over, curious. What is it? She shook her head. I don't know. Just a letter. She opened it. Inside was paper, folded neatly. The handwriting was familiar, his handwriting. I had to go north for a while. There are things I must face. Don't worry. I'll be back. Wait for me. Her breath caught. She looked up at him. You wrote this? He nodded slowly. I had to leave. Something urgent. I didn't want to tell you in person and break the morning calm. I thought a letter would ease it. She swallowed hard. And you expect me to just wait? Yes, he said softly. Because I'll come back. I promise. I always come back. The room felt smaller. The river light outside was pale, hesitant. She wanted to be angry, wanted to storm, wanted to push him into staying. But she couldn't. "I'll wait," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, firm. He stepped closer, taking her hand. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." She nodded. "I know." He left that evening. The apartment smelled of coffee and toast, quiet and still. She sat by the window, reading and rereading the letter, tracing his handwriting with her finger, feeling the pull of absence already pressing into the room. She walked along the river at dusk, letting the gray water move beneath her, imagining him somewhere north, facing what he had to face. The city hummed around her, indifferent. The ferry horns echoed in the distance, steady, reliable. She returned home as night fell. She lit a candle on the table, opened her notebook, and wrote, "I wait. The river moves. The city hums. And I remain, here, patient, steady, believing in the promise of return." She placed the letter beside her, pressed a small stone over it. Havana, years ago, a reminder of love that survived distance, storms, and silence. The wind moved outside. The river shimmered in the moonlight. And though she was alone, she felt him near. Some promises, she realized, weren't made in words alone. They were made in patience, in trust, in quiet endurance. Chapter 20, The Return. The morning was sharp with light. Sun caught the river, turning it silver, steady and patient. She sat at the window, coffee in hand, staring at the water, reading and rereading the letter he had left. The days had stretched long, each one measured in small rituals: walks along the river, ferry horns, notebooks, tea, the quiet hum of the city. She had waited. She had believed. And now, something in the air felt different. The door opened. She didn't hear the key, didn't see him enter at first. Only a shadow fell across the floor. She turned. He was there. Coat damp, hair tousled by travel, eyes the same, steady and alive. No words at first, just the recognition, the relief, the pull that had guided him home. "Hello," he said softly. "Hello," she said, her voice trembling. Not from fear, not from uncertainty, but from everything the months had held. He stepped forward. She didn't move. And then they closed the distance. Hands met, fingers intertwined, and the apartment seemed larger, brighter, filled with possibility. "I promised I'd come back," he said. "You did," she whispered. "You always do." They laughed softly, small, almost afraid of breaking the moment. The river flowed outside, silver and quiet. The city hummed softly. They sat together by the window, letting the morning move around them. Sunlight touched their shoulders, warmed their hands, fell across the notebook open on the table. He brushed her hair from her face. "I've missed you," he said. "I've waited," she said. "And now we have time," he said. "To live, to learn, to keep facing storms. Together." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Together. Later, they walked along the river. The city was awake, people moving, ferries sliding across the water, gulls circling in the distance. The past months, the storms, the absence, the letters, the miles, felt like threads woven into something stronger, something enduring. They didn't need to speak about it. The quiet between them was enough. Hands held, eyes steady, hearts learning the rhythm of days side by side. By evening, the apartment glowed with warm light. They cooked dinner together, laughed at small mistakes, poured wine, and listened to the river move. Ordinary moments, made extraordinary simply because they were together. Outside, the city shimmered. The river flowed, relentless and patient. Inside, they sat near the window, the storm behind them, the calm ahead. The story of distance, longing, and resilience had reached its quiet apex. And in the ordinary, in the rhythm of shared days, they found something lasting: love, stormy and patient, enduring and true. Epilogue, years later. The river flowed the same way it had when they first met, relentless, patient, silver in the morning light. The city had changed, buildings taller, streets busier, but the apartment near the water had stayed the same. She sat at the window with her notebook open. He was in the kitchen, humming, the smell of coffee and toast drifting through the air. They moved around each other with ease, small gestures full of familiarity, trust, and quiet affection. "Do you remember the first ferry ride?" she asked. "I do," he said. "I noticed you then, just like I notice you now." She smiled, tracing the rim of her cup. "And I've noticed you every day since." They didn't need more words. The river carried the sound of distant ferries, the city hummed softly, and outside, gulls circled lazily over the water. Inside, hands met, eyes held, and years of storms and distance had woven into something enduring. Love, they had learned, was not always fire and thunder. Sometimes it was steady, patient, quiet. And sometimes that was enough. They leaned against each other, listening to the city, the river, and the life they had built together. And it was enough.